Coming up, the New York Football Giants get their wide receiver at 6, Malik Nabers in Big Blue. But there was a ton of QB chaos at the top of this draft, and we know it's all about the weekend, baby, as we break down the key targets and the ways Joe Schoen can continue to improve the New York Football Giants. We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends, it is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, we're feeling the buzz of NFL draft weekend starting on Thursday night, starting at the top of the draft. Andy, we have so many things we're going to get into, especially into day number 2. Obviously, still a lot of moves for the Giants to make, but right there at the top, we'll get into the QB stuff. But first and foremost, Giants at 6. They don't move up, down, in, out, left, right. Malik Nabers is the pick. We said Rome Odunze, but by no stretch of the imagination are we not elated that the Giants have gotten themselves an elite number 1 talent.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it was like, do you want vanilla ice cream with this or do you want chocolate ice cream with that? Either way, we're getting nice results. So,
Yes.
I'm excited at the way the Giants approached the top of the draft. They clearly, through what we were hearing, were exploring all options that were on the table. And it sounded like they were looking to trade up, looking to trade back. And they said, if we're staying at 6, how does the board fall? Who do we have? And everyone said they had Malik Nabers as the guy. I also hear they had Marvin Harrison Jr. ranked slightly ahead of him. Didn't seem realistic. It sounds like Arizona had given Marvin Harrison Jr. a guarantee that they were going to take him regardless of what was going on. But Malik Nabers is an explosive. Like, you hear
Yes.
everyone talk about him. They ask scouts, they say he's a dog. He plays aggressive. He's explosive. One scout I saw, I believe, was talked to Dan Duggan and said, Marvin Harrison Jr. could be amazing. I told you that I thought Rome Odunze looked and played like a Larry Fitzgerald type of player, but
Yeah.
they said there's only one guy that they think has the ability to take an 8-yard slant route to the house in the top 3, and that was Malik Nabers. So he brings a whole different level of explosiveness rather than just like big body possession, touchdown type wide receiver, and that's what the Giants coveted at this pick. Everyone's giving it an A+. I'm not really into draft grades the second that they happen. But for what the Giants ended up doing and what they needed, this feels like a really smart pick for the Giants.
Yeah, of course. Listen, we talked about somebody had asked me over on X. Welcome everybody in. I see Dr. Pancake in the building for the live here. Joined us last night for the live draft coverage in the first round as well. Yeah, I mean, listen, I talked about when I asked why Rome Odunze maybe over Malik Nabers, and it wasn't about splitting hairs that, oh, here's why Malik Nabers isn't good. Obviously, we all know that's not the case, but just the idea of sitting there and saying the complementary nature of how you're going to build out your room. We think about a big body guy in Rome Odunze. We think about maybe not having a player at the tight end position in Darren Waller potentially going into this season. So you think, okay, it's going to be complementary. The other way to look at this, and clearly the way that the Giants and Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll looked at this is a player, when you watch him out of the slot in Malik Nabers, gosh darn it, man, they showed the highlights last night, right? His ability to take on the cornerback at the top of his route stems and go inside, shoulder dips, outside, just the manipulation that he can perform there and that short area quickness he has. That's what you're talking about. With Wan'Dale Robinson, we didn't get to see a ton of Jalen Hyatt last season, but in your mind, you think of these guys that are quick, fast, and most importantly for Malik Nabers and the Giants, the rack, right? The run after catch ability for Malik Nabers, when you combine that with Wan'Dale Robinson, I think that's what we're talking about here, building for this offense. Hey, I want to get the ball into these guys' hands. I want them to do a lot of the work after the catch, and it's going to go ahead and give us big chunk play opportunities. And, if we're just talking about the Giants at a high level, we know big change in the backfield, right? No more Saquon Barkley. So having these kind of weapons, these explosive playmakers that can do a lot once the ball is in their hands, you don't necessarily have to let the plays and routes develop all the way down the field. Not that I think they won't. That's what Malik Nabers brings in the door here. Really excited about it. It couldn't be last night, man. I think I was kind of exhausted and fatigued by the entire draft process, but I am. I'm really excited to see Malik Nabers be here in Big Blue. Flashed open the jacket, by the way, on draft night. All the pictures, all the family members lining the inside of his coat. Seems like a great kid. Can't wait. Can't wait to see him in camp here for the Giants.
What the thing I thought about once Malik Nabers was picked and why they may have taken him over Rome Odunze is,
Hmm,
and we'll talk about the quarterback stuff and how it impacts the Giants in a second, but it feels like the NFL is moving to like, let's just find where the explosive plays are. Because if we can hit off a 60-yard touchdown in like one play and get 7 points, that is way easier than methodically having to move down the field and have everything go right on the field. No penalties,
sure.
no drops, no missed assignments, all that different stuff. And it feels like, some of the other players, like, I compare Rome Odunze's traits to a Larry Fitzgerald. A lot of people are saying Malik Nabers is like Odell Beckham Jr. The Giants felt like they were trying to get down the field constantly, and it was longer drives, try to be sustained drives, milk the clock, get into field goal range, and see what happens. This feels like a drastic change for them, where they're saying we want more explosive plays, and when you put Wandale Robinson in short space, you have Jalen Hyatt going vertical, and you have Malik Nabers, and you have those three line up. That feels like a way more explosive setup in the wide receiver room, and it feels like the Giants are going to force teams to have to figure out who do they double, where do they put the safety
Yeah.
over the top, who are they going to put against Wandale Robinson in the slot. This to me creates a lot of chaos and havoc that teams are going to have to plan for, and that leads to bigger, more explosive plays.
Yeah, and I think maybe, you and I fell prey to it, and it's on it's the everything, it's the total package. I remember a handful of years ago when Kenny Galladay was being traded for by the Giants, and you go, "Oh my goodness, it's gonna be Kenny Galladay." And I had that pause where I remembered how much I fell in love with big-bodied receivers and guys that go in high pointed, all that great stuff. Phenomenal. And I had reconfigured myself to what the modern NFL is. Roma Dunze just seemed like such a great prospect, a great, great individual that you get excited about it. But you're pointing out that reality, right? This is what so much of the NFL is predicated on. And the Giants, there's been times when I felt like the Giants are a step late on making some of those progressive decisions around where the NFL is going. This feels like one where they're trying to maybe playing a little bit of catch up because they didn't have a number one, but at least they're going in the direction where everything is going to be at the NFL level. Quickly before, not quickly, we can take our time with this. By the way, just a quick shout out. I said Dr. Pancake, also to Brolo. What's up? Thanks for being in on it. We'll go ahead and continue to move along with our draft. And you have any comments or questions, feel free to throw them up. But before we go any further, how about a little bit of this? Malik Nabers, the RAS score. Andy is a big fan of the RAS score. Frankly, so am I. You combine them all together, you get a really nice picture of it, right? So it's not just the 40-yard dash time there, which is elite. It's also when you look at the splits, the 20 and the 10, because it means that his get off, when we're talking about off the line of scrimmage and getting the advantage over top of those cornerbacks or top of those slot corners as well. Really impressive. The vertical, the broad are key here as well, especially when you do, right? Like we sit here and say, okay, the height obviously is not going to put him into the elite category and the weight, right? So he's, he is not a monstrous figure or imposing figure on the field here, but it's also the reason why, of course, being an LSU product, Andy, you're going to get those comparisons, Odell Beckham Jr., right? And that mold of type of player that it's not really about what you see on the measurables on paper. It's about the eye test and what you see when this kid gets on the field. Really like some of the routes that he ran at LSU. And I think one last thing I'll mention here before we move on is when you think about, and obviously it's going to be different, when you draft Jalen Hyatt last year, third round pick, but you talk about him, well, the route stem, route tree combinations, he's going to need to develop those things. When you go and watch it, even though a lot of the damage was done out of the slot for Malik Nabers, you also see the ability to be a very movable piece and clearly has an extensive route tree combination already walking in the door.
Yeah, shout out to Kentley Platt, who's the one that created the RAS score, and he puts all this together. He tries to take combine and pro day numbers and just see how they compare to other
And smush them all
players
together.
in what percentile they end up falling based on all of these attributes. It
Sure.
develops into this, relative athletic score, just saying relative to all of their other peers, how athletic is this guy? And just for context, you may say 9.67 out of 10. That sounds pretty good. That's about the same
Sure.
score that Justin Jefferson had. And this number for Malik Nabers ranks him 112 out of 3,402 wide receivers dating back to 1987. So you're talking, a
Near
very,
top
very
100.
elite
Near
group
top
of
100 of the
athletes
last
there.
3,000.
Yeah, basically top 100 of the last 3,400 means that he is a freak of nature. And Adam, it's not just
Yeah.
about that relative athletic score. It's that athletic score matches up to the explosive plays, matches up to the tape, matches up to what your eyes see when he's on the field. It's not just a guy that looks really fast running in shorts. He's done it all at the collegiate level, leaves with the most yards in LSU history catching the ball. That has to
Yeah.
tell you something with the pedigree of your Jamar Chases, Justin Jeffersons, Odell Beckham Jr.'s, etc.
And so, yeah, right. Yeah, right. Big wide receiver room there to be up at the top of leaving with that many yards there. Obviously, coming up here in a second, there's other things to this. What happened at the top of the draft? Why didn't the Giants get their quarterback? There was one available when they picked at 6, and then ultimately, what the heck happened with the Atlanta Falcons? My God, I mean, listen, it's a Giant show, but everybody knows. As I think Andy would say, well, they got drunk at the podium and they just started throwing out names, not entirely sure the direction that they were heading in here. We'll get into all of that. And then, of course, who are the Giants keeping their eye on going into day number 2? A lot of defensive players fell back in the first round as well. We continue our draft weekend coverage coming up here in just one moment. And of course, as always, live on YouTube, we remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Pietential, Pietential. That spells Pietential.com. It's a free for individual user online assessment tool, basically a wellness check-in. Goes ahead and sets a baseline for you, gives you tools to improve, and also tracks your progress over time. Maybe you were someone like JJ McCarthy, wondering when his name was going to be called. Maybe you were the entirety of the Atlanta Falcons nation, wondering what just happened when they picked Michael Penix Jr. at number 8. You get over to Pietential now and go ahead and start to set yourself on a better path to well-being. Pietential. I got there,
There you
Pietential.com.
go.
All right, when we talk about top of the draft here, just quickly for the Giants, obviously, the general consensus is Giants were interested in getting Drake May. They tried to make that trade up for it. Somehow, magically, the New England Patriots woke up and said, oh, we do need a franchise quarterback. They stayed at 3. They drafted him. Nothing changed. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May right there at the top. Nothing changed. Marvin Harrison Jr., right? Did change. Nothing changed, excuse me. Joe Alt there at 5 as well, right? So everything goes according basically to the original plan. The Giants get there. They have all the evaluation, and it ends up being wide receiver. Do you take any issue? Are you one of these fans that says it's a massive failing they didn't go get their quarterback? Massive failing they didn't take JJ McCarthy. Are you okay, Andy, this morning?
Well, so we talked about this exact scenario when we went live yesterday in the pre-draft, mock draft predictions. The only thing we got wrong on the top was we thought JC Latham was going to go at 5. Joe Alt went at 5.
He
We
spiked.
flip-flopped 5 and 7. But I mean, we were pretty spot on
But
with
he was
what was
there,
going
though.
to be
Yeah.
available to the Giants. So credit to you, Adam. Credit to me. We feel pretty good about
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
But
Thank you.
we talked about this exact scenario: JJ McCarthy, Malik Nabers, and Rome Odunze sitting there at 6.
Yeah.
Clearly, the Giants had their pick. They could have decided any way that they wanted to go, and they said Malik Nabers gives us the best chance to win here. And I have no problem with it. It's okay for the Giants to do evaluations of all the top quarterbacks, run the numbers, look at overall and say, okay, there is a clear cutoff in our mind of who are the game-changing quarterbacks that could be a franchise quarterback for the Giants, and who, based on their value, makes more sense if we were to trade back or move down, or who we are eliminating through this process that doesn't get us better than what we have in our current quarterback room. Like, that's why you bring in these people for top 30 visits. And so for me, the Giants basically looked at it and said, we believe that Malik Nabers gives us a better opportunity to round out this team and a better allocation of assets based on where we have JJ McCarthy, Malik Nabers, and Rome Odunze. And I think that's okay. It's okay to say the Giants thought that Drake May could be a franchise quarterback that could get them better quarterback play than what Daniel Jones has given them. And it's also okay to say we'd rather allocate draft capital elsewhere rather than pick JJ McCarthy over Daniel Jones. So I think the people that say quarterback or bust at 6, this shows that they did this evaluation. They don't value JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix or Bo Nix as high as the others.
Well, guess what? They don't value Drake May as high as some people may think, because whether or not the New England Patriots were never going to move out of the pick or not, the whole idea was to see how deep are people willing to go into their draft pockets to come up here to get Drake May. That's what I think is one of the ironies too. It's like, if you're the New England Patriots and your intention is to take Drake May, or you feel like it's 90+% you're going to take May, don't even put out the possibility you're willing to trade out. Because to me, it's just such a bad seed into your rookie quarterback's head of like, yeah, do we love you? I mean, now if somebody had told me, 2, 3 first-round picks, then we would have loved you a little bit less. But just to your point, that's what it is, man. When you make the board up, and you and I have talked about this a lot, If you can get the quarterback, it obviously is a great move. I think if it was the exact same scenario that played out and the Giants already had either what they felt like was a number one wide receiver in the room, maybe if they'd already traded for a T. Higgins, if they felt like they had another couple of positions along the offensive line that were already guaranteed locks, I think J.J. McCarthy would have been more in the cards. Because as you and I have discussed, it's not just about the QB, it's about all the players around them. We may not think that Daniel Jones is going to be a franchise quarterback and that road is kind of already faded into the rearview mirror. But when you go back and evaluate what have we seen, you know that it's not like Daniel Jones came into a great position. It's not like Zach Wilson went into a great position with the Jets. A lot of this happens around the league. It doesn't mean that those players, oh my goodness, if only they had gone to Kansas City, they'd be Patrick Mahomes. Of course not. But situations matter. And I think the Giants and Joe Schoen obviously have the confidence from the front office to take a little bit of a longer view here. We need the number one wide receiver. We still need to add other pieces. We're going to talk about that. And this way you get yourself there. The only other thing really quick, and then I want to move on to Atlanta, and we got to get into all these other picks that the Giants are going to be making here coming up on day 2, is the idea. I saw this thrown out there. Well, obviously the J.J. McCarthy was all a smokescreen. No, it wasn't. It was all evaluation. You spend all this time and effort and scouting and research and interviews to have players confirm or deny that they are worth the 6th overall pick or not, that they are a franchise quarterback or not. And at the end of the day, Malik Nabers, maybe Rome Odunze as well, if it had not been Malik available there at 6. More value. These are more valuable players to what we want to accomplish. And fans may have a hard time wrapping their head around that when you're talking about a quarterback, but it's just true. Sometimes you have to do the evaluation chart correctly. Then it came out with Malik Nabers. You have to be excited about that.
2 things, and then we can move on to what happens after the Giants. The first thing that you mentioned, listen, the New England Patriots are hilarious. Like, you hear them, the GM comes out, we're open for business at 3. Then you hear, beat writers saying they oddly like 6 players potentially in the first round. And then you hear them after they draft Drake May, and they're like, oh, we made the decision weeks ago that we were going to pick Drake May. It's like, did you? Because the GM just said you're open for business like 5 days ago. So how, obviously they don't want to derail Drake May and seem like that. It's kind of saving face for him. Like, you were always our guy. I promise I didn't have a wandering eye in the bar type situation, right? So there's one thing. What I don't understand is if the Giants build out their board and they have Malik Nabers ranked at 2, and he's an area of need, and they have J.J. McCarthy ranked at 23, and they say, there's the delta between these 2 players that we should just throw out our draft board to be able to get a guy that we don't necessarily have as highly ranked. Makes no sense to me. But Adam, to the point is, if Malik Nabers is in there and the Giants have Rome Odunze ranked 15th and J.J. McCarthy 23rd, maybe the Giants trade out. Maybe they trade back with one of those teams that wanted to get Michael Penix, et cetera. Now all of a sudden you're at 14, 15, 16. If you have J.J. McCarthy in that range, you've picked up valuable draft assets. You can address wide receiver later. And also then you can justify where you have him on your board. So for me, it's all about doing the proper homework and being confident in the board that you've created. Or what's the point of doing all this work over the last 6 months? Right? Like, I don't understand.
If you're going to get, yes, exactly. Trust what you've done and understand that there's the value there. And you have to believe in it. We heard Joe Schoen say this: paralysis by analysis. You can't overdo it. You try to set your board ahead of time. You prepare for every eventuality, but maybe there's going to be curveballs in there. Thankfully, the Giants picked at 6 in a lot of ways because a lot of things kind of went haywire in behind them there. Before we talk about Atlanta and just some of those things briefly and get into the second round for the Giants, quick things here as we are live over on YouTube. So Dr. Pancake saying, I'm excited for picks 47 and 70, as well you should be. We got a question coming in here, cornerback in round 2. We're going to talk about that, certainly. This one is, I'm pointing this out, Ryan, man, everyone's good to have your opinions. Good pick if we had a good quarterback. Sorry to see Nabers' career go trash. They have Hyatt, and he does not see a lot of play time, and that's a waste of a pick, and Nabers will fall in the same way. It's obviously, listen, I respect anyone being depressed about being a Giants fan because it hasn't been glossy. But this is just, it's misguided from the standpoint of what Malik Nabers is as a wide receiver, 3rd-round pick, top 6 pick in the NFL draft. Arguably, if you go over to NFL.com, the highest prospect grade in the draft Malik Nabers, ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., ahead of Caleb Williams. So you can make a case the Giants got the best prospect in the NFL draft with a 6th overall pick. So he's going to come in the door like a gangbuster. He's going to be a featured weapon inside of this system, and everybody else is going to play off of him. So listen, we understand. There's another good one here I'll just reference quickly. What some people aren't realizing is Jones might be their guy from Ronnie Bennett Jr. I said this a couple weeks ago. Whether or not in the grand scheme of things, Daniel Jones is the guy, it's just worth noting that we sometimes say Joe Schoen can be a little too honest. And he said a couple of times over this offseason, we believe in Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is going to be the starting quarterback. Now, is that relative to J.J. McCarthy? And they believe in Daniel Jones more than J.J., right? They believe in Daniel Jones less than Drake May if they could have gotten him. They believe in him less than Patrick Mahomes, but unfortunately he's not available, right? So he is at least going to be the quarterback in that room. We'll see about health, Drew Lock, etc. So all really good, though, conversations that are being had here. Want to make sure we give that shout out.
Andy. I wanted to just say one more thing. It's like the Chris Rock skit, like people are only as faithful as their options. It's like, yes, they believe in Daniel Jones, but if you could trade Daniel Jones for Patrick Mahomes, you would do it in a second. What I think people are understanding is, let's just say that the Giants GM who gave him this 4-year contract believes that Daniel Jones is maybe what? The 15th best quarterback in the league, right? I don't know. Give or take 5 either way, like that's where they believe. If the Giants thought they could improve the team and get a top 10-ish type quarterback, that's what Joe Schoen would do. If he thinks that J.J. McCarthy is the 20th best quarterback when he comes in, why draft him at 6 when you think you have the 15th best quarterback? The whole point is you're only as tied to whatever your options are. And the Giants sat there and said, our best option is having Daniel Jones at quarterback for this season with Malik Nabers long-term rather than any other options that are available to us.
Yeah, all they told you was we believe in Malik Nabers as being an elite number 1 wide receiver for our franchise for many years to come. That's what this really tells you. It says more about Malik Nabers than it does about Daniel Jones. Now, after Malik Nabers, you mentioned Latham went to Tennessee. Nice pick for them. At 9, Rome Odunze, he goes to Chicago. This is what happens, man. When you get somebody eager to move up and they give you all these kind of assets, all of a sudden you have picks 1 and 9. What a great combination. That team, that NFC North is going to be phenomenal. J.J. McCarthy does come off the board. A little flip-flop with the Jets there to get up to 10. It's Fashanu for the Jets coming in at 11. Bo Nix, 6 quarterbacks went in the top 12. Bo Nix rounded it out there for the Denver Broncos. And did I skip over something? Oh, that's right. At the 8th overall selection, a team that just paid a boatload of money to Kirk Cousins to be the quarterback over the short term. This is not a knock on one Michael Penix Jr. This is just a WTF for ATL. Why in the world did you give all this money to Kirk Cousins if you assume that you had done your research, scouted, and fell in love with Michael Penix Jr., and you're sitting there at the 8th pick with seemingly no real buzz that someone was going to claim him before you?
What an insane move by the Atlanta Falcons. And this is where things jump the shark. Adam, they just gave Kirk Cousins a $180 million deal. They gave him $100 million guaranteed a month ago.
100 light bucks, 100 million light bucks.
I mean, it's not Shroot bucks. This isn't The Office where like you go on the
real
farm
dollars
and you turn them in. It's not Monopoly money. They gave him $100 million guaranteed. If things go well for the Atlanta Falcons, Michael Penix Jr. does not see the field for at least 3 years, right? Kirk Cousins is guaranteed 2 years worth of money. The third year is kind of half guaranteed, and it's $100 million of cash. So maybe the earliest is year 3 that you see Michael Penix. He's already one of the oldest. That's the problem. Michael Penix as a player is a great player. We want to preface it that like there's nothing against Michael Penix Jr., the player itself, right? Adam, I just wanted to start out with that.
I think Michael Penix Jr. is a great prospect talent. We know the injury concerns. That was the only thing really coming into the draft. He's an elite prospect talent. Everybody knows that. This is not a knock on Michael Penix Jr. Anybody else inside of the top 15 could have drafted Michael Penix Jr. and we would have been like, wow, what a great pick. It's going to be awesome for them. I can even objectively say, oh, wow, what a great pick for Atlanta, like, to have a young quarterback. But he's 24 years old. And what is the best case scenario? To your point, 3 years, maybe a little bit, but at 25 years old, at 26 years old, he's going to take it over. It's like the Atlanta Falcons blacked out and forgot that they just paid the quarterback this offseason. It just seems shocking to me. And we know, as was reported, Kirk Cousins, not that, listen, he's not, future Hall of Famer Kirk Cousins, or maybe he is, who knows the way these ballots work. But they didn't even tell him, hey, we're taking Michael Penix Jr. It's just, what is the structure going to look like here in Atlanta? Because a 24-year-old quarterback, you at least want to get him on the field, within 1 or 2 years. And by the way, it would have been less alarming if even though it doesn't matter fit otherwise, if they took JJ McCarthy, who's 21 years old, you go, oh, okay, 2 years from now when he's 23, 3 years from now when he's 24 years old, he still has 15 years ahead of him in his career. Michael Penix Jr., you want him out there on the field sooner than later.
Yeah, it is funny. Let's just say that if they drafted JJ McCarthy and he sat for 2 years, he would still be younger than Michael Penix Jr. is today.
Right.
Like that's
Yeah.
the reality of this. And that's why it makes no sense. And it's even more criminal that it was the same GM and head coach that just gave Kirk Cousins this $100 million deal a month ago. It's not like Kirk Cousins got $100 million from a previous regime last year.
Yeah.
They're resetting it. They're
Yes.
saying this is their guy, a la what Sean Payton just did, where he's like, I didn't want Russell Wilson. He's not my guy. We're going to get out of it. You're like, okay, you would rather have Bo Nix and an $80 million dead cap hit than Russell Wilson. Fine. You didn't draft him. You didn't make the original mistake. To me, it's just confounding what Atlanta did. It just shows like the strategy that they had. Well, I don't, did he black out and just scream Michael Penix Jr.? Did he write down the wrong card? I don't know. But this just shows how crazy the draft can go. Then all of a sudden you mentioned 6 quarterbacks go in the top 12. None of them go to the Giants. Bo Nix goes to number 12 to the Broncos. It felt like because all of these quarterbacks went so early and were kind of reaches that it left teams in the mid-teens getting the best defensive players still available to them.
Of course. So we want to get into the Giants here as we get into day number 2. Brock Bowers goes 13 to the Raiders. They seem to end up in no man's land there, basically, with the run on QBs. We heard them. They wanted Jaden Daniels, couldn't get up there either. Then you talk about a guy like Byron Murphy. He ends up going 16 there to the Seattle Seahawks. You end up getting Dallas Turner. Vikings make the move to come up to 20 from 23 to 17. They pick him up there. So like all of those defensive talents that were considered to be fringe rate at the top 10, some inside of the top 10, they all slide down the list here a little bit. And then you see, man, Brian Thomas Jr. goes kind of right where he was slotted to the Jaguars, 23rd overall, and down you move. But by the way, you didn't see until what was it? We had Arnold, cornerback, 24th to the Detroit Lions. Like it couldn't have broken any better for Detroit, who needed a player like that. So when you move down the list, Quinyon Mitchell, 22nd overall, he goes to the Eagles. So of course they continue to get better. But work our way through this first round. Leggett goes at the back end there. Of course, Worthy went to the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't want to pass over this. We'll rehash it out on the back end, but I do want to get to what matters most now for the Giants, and that's moving forward into this second round and talking about positions of need, Andy. Whether you want to say top 30 visits that you think fall into this range, who do you have your eye on for the Giants? I'll lead it off right now by saying, if there was the ability, top 30 visit, Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama is the 3rd highest ranked on ESPN's best available big board right now. If you can find a way to get to 47, if you can pick that right spot there, I think you have to really consider going and getting a guy that you believe is a first-round talent grade and a player you highly scouted and brought in. So you clearly believe you can pair him across from Deonte Banks and have that secondary look pretty darn good.
Yeah, Adam, it's interesting because as of right now, you look at it, the Giants basically have the 15th pick. And so when you start looking at the best available players, you start thinking about, well, where does that put them? If you look at the top 21 players that are best available on ESPN's big board, 6 of them are cornerbacks. It feels like this is a perfect
something
situation.
sexy may just fall to you.
I mean, the reality is other teams have needs. We know, we assume that the Buffalo Bills with the first pick are going to address the wide receiver position after they traded out and gave the Chiefs Xavier Worthy, who's probably going to be like the best player out on the planet now. But
naturally,
the Buffalo Bills are clearly going to look at a guy like Keon Coleman, Adonai Mitchell, whoever they feel like they like at the wide receiver position. Ladd McConkey is still there. There are going to be other areas of need for other teams. One of those cornerbacks, I am confident in saying, will be there for the Giants. And it does feel like the next biggest area of need. At the 21 position on the big board right now, we have Max Melton, cornerback from Rutgers. He's definitely someone that's on the radar for the Giants. Feels like he has the possibility to be there. Cooper DeJean is obviously was the 3rd ranked cornerback. He's still sitting out there. If the Giants wanted to move up, you mentioned Kool-Aid McKinstry. There's a whole host of guys that the Giants can look at. I'm in agreement with everyone that I see in the chat. That's like, cornerback is a priority. Cornerback is the priority.
Yeah.
Luckily enough for the Giants, there is a surplus of talent in this second round. And you just hope that maybe some other positions are taken and other areas are addressed by other teams to where the Giants may have the ability for one of these superstar type guys at the cornerback position to fall to them at 47, or maybe move up a couple spots to get your guy.
47 and then obviously 70 as well. Let's continue the conversation around key players. We'll give some predictions, and we also have top 30 talent that overall this weekend we'd like the Giants to keep an eye on. We'll be right back in discussing it live on YouTube and highlighting some of your comments and questions in just one moment. And as we continue to highlight all these great talents at 47, 47, 37 be better, a little bit higher, maybe move up. And at 70 as well, obviously going back 107, they'll have some later round picks too. We remind you this portion of our live episode is brought to you by Personam, an AI-driven cyber threat detection engine. Personam improves your vision into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats that other tools and platforms just cannot do. Personam is always vigilant, always learning. So we talk about that there. Interestingly enough, so maybe, I go both ways here, right? Now, Kool-Aid McKinstry, just from a prospect standpoint, it has always been a first-round graded talent. So he falls out of there because of the other run that happens there. So you feel like, relative, maybe you're getting an extra value there. But to your point, there's this collection of players there that you feel like maybe you can wait and let one fall to you. Quickly here, before we talk about other top 30 visits and other names that we like and want to keep an eye on here from 47 all the way to 70. If you're sitting there and you see DeJean, McKinstry, Rakestraw, who I'm not as big a fan of or as high on as some other people are. You mentioned Lassiter going back a couple of weeks. TJ Tampa certainly there as well. And then you get down to Max Melton. Max Melton is the 53rd overall ranked prospect, even though he's going to be 21 best available right now. Thread the needle. Like, depending on how the board breaks, do you thread the needle and you're at 47 and somebody wants a wide receiver? Somebody wants maybe Edgerrin Cooper, who I've highlighted before, but the value isn't right for the Giants positionally. Little margin move back 2 spots, still get a cornerback, and maybe just pick up an extra mid-round pick. Like, this is where I think Joe Schoen, we've seen this in the last 2 years. He likes to dance around the draft board, and I would expect that if they have the right player kind of listed there, I wouldn't be shocked if there's either a small move back, maybe a little jump up from 70 to dance around and identify 2 key players of need.
Yeah, listen, it's an interesting position. I mentioned if cornerback starts to fall and other areas are being addressed, teams maybe move up for Spencer Rattler, your favorite player in the NFL draft, Adam, or they look and they need defensive line help or whatever it's going to be. Obviously, that may present itself for Joe Schoen to move back, collect another 3rd or 4th round pick, and be able to fill out this roster. What I do find fascinating is the number 2 player on ESPN's big board is Johnny Newton, right? Adam, you highlighted him as a potential guy. I said Johnny Newton was not for me because of the injuries that he had. It's clearly the reason why he has fallen. Having a Jones fracture in your foot, never good for a guy that carries over 300 pounds. But man, he's a guy to look at for the Giants to move up if they really want to go get a guy that they like. Remember, Johnny Newton was brought in for a top 30 visit. He's the 2nd best interior defensive lineman in this draft. He's ranked
21st
on ESPN as the 21st overall prospect. If you could get him at 34 or 35 and surrender a mid to late round pick to move up, it's one of those things where you've got to think about if the Giants really want to make the defensive front the area of strength, he is going to be someone they have to consider, right?
Okay, so, and it's funny because I highlighted him, and then it was, you rightfully brought up the injury and said, I don't know if you can, with all those concerns. And I think it's still valid. And obviously, if a player, this is basically what I talked about. Well, as he falls towards 47, at some point, a near top 20 talent in the draft, you have to evaluate that. Though there is the irony about, well, the injury history, I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk taking him. Well, I could risk taking him in the 2nd round. I just can't risk taking him in the 1st round. We understand why. But here's what I would say and why I talk about, cornerbacks maybe dropping a little bit. If you want to go that route of defensive front, as you work your way down this list, you do have to remember that there is a player out there right now, 15th best available on the big board with lineage in the NFL, and that is one Chris Jenkins. He is ranked, wouldn't you know it, 47th overall on ESPN's big board. Chris Jenkins, 6'3", 300-pounder defensive tackle. So if you want to go that route of thinking about taking a player like that, this is what I mean about, to me, this feels like, I know I mentioned McKinstry there, but when you highlight how deep the cornerback room looks right now, maybe there'll be the run, right? The run starts to happen, and all of a sudden as 47's approaching, you go, my God, move up quick. We're going to miss every single cornerback here. or you get this little threaded value where there's something extra here. And I wonder how far back it goes, because remember, just as a reminder, deeper into this class, when we talked about top 30 visits, the Giants do have a player like, and I'm not trying to steal your thunder here, even though I originally mentioned him and then you stole him as one of the guys you believe will be a Giant. Cornerback Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky, 86th overall on the big board. So the Giants are going to play with a lot of this stuff. Is he worthy of the 70th pick? Can we trade back a few spots in that third round and still get a guy that we really like? So all these things are going to factor in here. But if you're talking about strengthening the defensive front, I think Chris Jenkins has to be on the radar there too in the second.
Well, and it feels like it's funny how the NFL does the first round as its own grand old stage for on Thursday night, and then Friday
Of course.
rounds 2 and 3 end up getting kind of lumped together. And I think teams are going to be thinking about those two rounds kind of in a symbiotic relationship, Adam, where it's like,
Yeah.
we know we have a couple areas of need. What we do in the second round is going to dictate what we do in the third. We have more flexibility to move up because it doesn't cost us multiple first round picks like it does in the first round. So let's figure out what we want. What I think is going to be fascinating is, and we've talked about this before, and right on cue in the chat, we could use a running back at 70. Now, Adam, if you think about the Giants looking at it and saying, maybe we go Jaden Hicks, maybe we go Kamari Lassiter, and then we decide that we like Marshawn Lloyd in the third round at 70. Or
Sure. Yeah.
if the Giants are thinking, what if we could get Jonathan Brooks? What if we could get Trey Benson with the 47th pick? And then Andrew Phillips is there with the 70th pick. If you're thinking about addressing both of those positions, maybe you like the setup of those based on who's available and where the cutoffs are. I don't necessarily want the Giants to pick a running back that high. I think Audric Estime of Notre Dame feels like a fourth, fifth round guy that I would highlight. You know, we've talked about Guerrero out of Louisville being a crazy athlete that you could plug in the fifth, sixth round. To me, it's not how I would allocate my draft capital, but you know that these are the conversations that Joe Schoen and team are having. Like, where's the cutoff for these two different positions we know we need to attack?
Yeah, and they already talked about this too coming into the draft overall NFL, saying, running back, the run is probably not going to happen until the second, maybe even a little bit further back. You mentioned Jonathan Brooks. He's a 42nd ranked overall player. Trey Benson, he's been talked about 58th. You talk about Corum out of Michigan, 67th. Then you talk about Marshawn Lloyd, 71st. I cannot see the Giants going in that direction. Now, if you want to follow the first round thread and say, well, you got the elite talent in Malik Nabers and you want to bolster this offensive system, whether it's for Daniel Jones right now in this moment or for the future quarterback that you're going to drop in, obviously you can make a case for it. But again, whether it's going to be cornerback, you mentioned Jaden Hicks. I really like him. Now, he's 59th overall on the board. Do you have to get that a little bit sooner? If you go cornerback at 47, does it make it less likely that you would then invest in safety at 70? There's a part of this where he's rising almost out of the pocket where you'd go, it's one or the other. Either we take Jaden Hicks, maybe as high as 47, because 59th on the board right now, maybe as high, maybe a marginal trade back and you still get him. And then you look at an Andrew Phillips later. But how those two positions play off one another, I think does matter, because I'd be hard pressed to think the Giants go, second round, third round, cornerback, safety. It seemed like you'd miss out on a lot of other deep talent. So running back, I don't mind the idea of bringing somebody in. I just think that it falls way too far down the pecking order. Understanding you lost Saquon Barkley, you brought in Singletary. It's not the same thing. They also brought in the young talent this offseason who signed, as you went through the entire laundry list of how his journey to the NFL was confused by eligibility and otherwise. So the room just feels like it's got enough bodies in there. Maybe a later mid-round pick could certainly come along the way. Who would be, as we're going to round ourselves out here, who would be your guys to watch? Jaden Hicks is one of my top players that I think could end up being a New York Football Giant. You put Andrew Phillips on your list there. Give me another couple of guys here over the second and third round, maybe even a little bit deeper, that you think should be kept an eye on here for the New York Giants.
You mentioned it before, just briefly, that I've touched upon him and did a little bit of work on him. But Kamari Lassiter, the cornerback, is a guy that I just have picked out of Georgia. He's ranked as 13th on the big board right now. He's someone that I've had my eye on at the Giants at 47. His overall ranking by ESPN is about 45. He's the seventh best cornerback to me. He's a guy that is pretty fundamentally sound. I like him a lot. Obviously, he doesn't have the speed, and he's not gonna be able to match up with Tyreek Hill one-on-one with the type of speed that he has, but who really can at the cornerback position?
You got a guy with a great speed on the other side in Deontay Banks, right? He has that low 4.35 speed.
Yes, and so I think he would be a smart pick. I think that it's really tough to find cornerbacks that can handle one-on-one coverage as you get into like the fifth, sixth, seventh round. It feels like the
Sure.
second round is the area I really would want that. I mentioned Audric Estime, the running back out of Notre Dame. He feels like a guy that the Giants have definitely had eyes on.
Hmm.
Local product from around the area. Feels very natural that he's going to be someone that the Giants are going to look at. Those are the two ones that I think are most important as we look at it. I know you've mentioned that you like Trey Benson. The Giants have brought him in for a top 30 visit. He could be someone that you're thinking about, like, well, we didn't pay Saquon Barkley $15 million a year. Maybe with our third round pick, we look to address the running back room if Trey Benson's still there.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, exactly. How far do they fall, right? Because again, it's the same exact thing. At 47, I don't think running back, but now all of a sudden, if one of the top 40 talents in the draft is there at 70, you really reevaluate your board. A couple of guys I would throw out. I talked about Hicks already. I think Cooper Beebe, he's 78th overall right now. Certainly, there's something to be discussed there. If you feel like you want to strengthen the interior offensive line, does that feel like, oh, it's not really going to solve a problem right now this year? Maybe it doesn't, but guess what? It's not just about this year. You brought in some veterans this offseason, as Ken's pointing out. Smart guy. Always said Ken was smart, knew it all along. That you want to go ahead and prepare for the future. And Cooper Beebe really does profile as a player that you can look at developing right into a starting role for this team, maybe going into next year, maybe being that nice rotational piece, giving you some flexibility about what you do across that line. As we know, we still have questions about Evan Neal as well. So I would keep an eye on a player like that. Ben Sinote, maybe the tight end. We still don't know that. The 93rd on the board, you're not going to reach for him at 70, but a name to certainly keep an eye on. And I'll also throw out Mason Smith out of LSU. That I thought was certainly a player to kind of monitor here and see where he falls on the board as well. I have guys over the weekend when we talk about a player like Tyrese Knight, the linebacker, we're talking about 198 on the board. And I also really like, if we want to talk about a player, offensive line help, 132 on ESPN's big board, Patrick Paul out of Houston. I think that he makes a lot of sense for the Giants, maybe as high as 107, fourth round. Get your guy right there in the middle that you believe is going to come in and help strengthen this offensive line.
Yeah, Adam, you're pointing out a good point about the offensive line. I do think that it's going to be I think it's going to be fascinating to see if the Giants decide to draft an offensive tackle or an offensive guard coming up. We think they're going to address
Yes,
the offensive
that'll
line
play
at
a little bit
some
of a
point,
story, right?
but that will inform us of what we believe the Giants to be thinking. They obviously went in free agency and got John Runyon Jr., who projects to be a guard. They got Illuminor, who is a guard, maybe has swing tackle capabilities, not really sure what he works on yet. If they go with Cooper Beebe, then it feels more like the Giants are thinking Illuminor could be a guy competing for the right tackle position. If they go with someone like, I'm just going to throw out a name, Blake Fisher, offensive tackle, Notre Dame. He's one of the guys that's ranked pretty high on the big board. He's 24th best available player right now. Could be a guy to target at number 70. If the Giants decide to take him, he's the 11th best offensive lineman. It would be interesting if the Giants went ahead and decided to take a tackle in the third round. It would basically be saying the clock is really officially, the panic button has been hitting on Evan Neal, and we have backups in a third round draft pick, Illuminor, and a whole host of other players that could get in there, right? It feels like the pressure starts ratcheting up if they're allocating resources this early in the draft.
It's like everyone standing in the club dancing, and Evan Neal's just right by the door, and all of a sudden he's like, Am I outside the club? Am I no longer inside? I'm outside the ropes now? Like it is, man. And that can be indicative of it. Really quick here, I'll just mention in terms of running backs, you want a name from me? It's going to be the 97th overall player, 65th best available right now, Jalen Wright out of Tennessee. That's a weapon. Talking about near 107 margin move up. That's when I would go make that type of splash. The other thing here, just really quick, Spencer Rattler in the third, says Jason Garcia. I hope not. I don't believe in taking a 24-plus-year-old quarterback in the third round. This team has a lot of needs. Yes, they did extensive on him. And hey, if they take him, you believe in Dable, right? QB developer, we understand that. But I would be surprised if they went that route, certainly. By the way, Daniel Jones not bringing us a Super Bowl, period. I didn't say that he ever was. No, but I don't think anyone thinks that he is. But can he be a quarterback that throws the ball to Malik Nabers and gets a bunch of yardage? I think that he could do that over the short term. And maybe Waller will want to play next to Nabers. I don't care what Waller wants to do from a pure football standpoint. He has his personal life and things going on there. From a football standpoint, he is not a player that I am overly concerned about trying to convince to come be a part of what the New York Football Giants are doing here.
Adam, at the end of the day, this is a great quote. It's like what would you guys think when the season starts and DJ's your quarterback and Neighbors is not getting the ball? Trying to be positive, I just don't see it. I think what I want everyone to understand is the Giants felt that Daniel Jones, with his contract, throwing the ball to Malik Nabers makes more sense than reaching on their big board for Bo Nix or JJ McCarthy and having
Sure.
him throw the ball to Darius Slayton and being like, now we've compounded our mistakes where we have Daniel Jones coming off the books, but we reached on a quarterback that we didn't necessarily believe in. Where would that put us? And so for me,
Yeah.
I look at all of this and I just think, Adam, they're building the roster the right way. They're taking the best available players to them. Look no further than the Rams, who said, Jared Goff isn't our guy. Let's go get Stafford. We have the team to compete, and they win a Super Bowl. Let's look no further than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who said, Jameis Winston can only take us so far. We need to get another guy. Let's bring in Tom Brady. This is not the be-all, end-all for the New York Giants. But right now, building the roster, they felt that Malik Nabers gives them the best chance to be a full team ready to compete if they get one or two other pieces. And at the end of the day, that's the most important. The Giants are improving the overall roster. I know people are frustrated thinking that Daniel Jones is going to be there, but he is presumably going to be the guy for this year while they continue to construct the roster to make it an appealing place where the next disgruntled quarterback wants out and wants to be a New York Giant.
Very quickly, exactly. The Giants have $40 million allocated to the QB spot. It means next off season, they would have about $40 million to allocate to the QB spot if a player became available. Getting a player like Malik Nabers makes everybody's life easier. Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, Daniel Jones, the offensive line, the running backs, everything gets easier when you have an elite talent like that. So play it out. Let's see what happens here. But in the meantime, over on YouTube, where you're watching us right now, at One Giant Podcast, I did live for the first round as it was unfolding. We may wait a little bit and come in between the second and third rounds tonight so we can highlight what happened, discuss it, but be a part of it, man. Good group in here this morning. So everyone seems to like the early AM. Be a part of what we're doing at night as well. Going into the weekend, gave you a list of players to keep an eye on. Darius Slayton, maybe being traded now with Malik Nabers, getting an extra mid-round pick. A lot of things for the Giants and Joe Schoen to figure out here, and every other team in the league is doing exactly the same thing. Over on X, at AMAC214, at Adam Armick, and at One Giant Podcast. Appreciate everybody getting in here and being a part of the discussion around the New York Football Giants. We'll continue the coverage all weekend long. Until next time, until the best times, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.